Now on to our next topic that will address how we can demand, drive and support each other to create more diversity and inclusion in the European digital advertising industry today. And Maya Tank, client partner at DoubleVerify, will lead this important discussion. And again, don't forget, you can submit any questions you want for the panel in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, I shall hand it over to Maya.
Thanks so much, Nick. I guess I'll start by saying that we know DEI spans a wide range of conversations, and I guess it means something different to absolutely everyone. So as you've already introduced myself, I'd like to pass on to the panelists, if you could introduce yourselves, but also if you could let us know what that means to you. Rachel, if you don't mind, are you happy to kick us off?
Once I unmute myself, yes. Hi everyone. My name's Rachel Scheel. I'm the SVP for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion and Sustainability at Criteo. And I firmly believe you can't have D, E and I separate. They form together, and they really do form the outcome of a culture of belonging. So when we think about diversity, it's about who's in the room, really ensuring that we embrace everyone's uniqueness. Equity is about accessible opportunities, and it often gets mixed up with equality, but it is about understanding that differences matter and that we can accommodate those differences. And then inclusion is about, how do we hear people? How do we help people feel safe? How do we help people feel wanted? And then the three of them together really does truly powerfully bring belonging to life.
Perfect, thank you. Sabah, should we pass on to you?
Hi, I'm Sabah. I work at IAS. I'm on the strategic sales team. For me, it's really about a drive towards equity in our industry. Everyone should be treated the same way, have access to the same opportunities. And I feel that if you have that attitude, you naturally foster diversity and inclusion in your workforce. It's also about a willingness to educate myself and to be an active ally and a participant in driving that change in our industry.
Great. Nikki?
Hi there, I'm Nikki. I work at PubMatic in the EMEA Ad Solutions team. D&I, for me, really is about everybody having the opportunity to bring their full selves to whatever situation they're in, so whether that's inside the workplace or outside the workplace, and really have their kind of uniqueness, nice, but also celebrated and valued for the impact that can make.
And Ravleen?
Hi, thanks Maya. I'm Ravleen Beeston, I'm VP of Sales here at Microsoft Advertising. And actually what DE&I means to me, probably a little bit of what everybody's already said. That's the problem, we're going last. But I think personally for me, it's really as simple as just having and creating an equitable playing field for everyone, equal opportunities and representation. I'm a massive believer of you can't be what you don't see, and so representation is so important. And I know we hear that quote again and again, but it is such an important one. And also the way that it allows everyone to work to their full potential when we really embrace inclusion and people feel that they belong.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. Obviously, we know that there are a number of different topics we could delve down. There's age, race, gender, neurodiversity, etc. I think this panel we discussed would be more general. So diversity, equity and inclusion, Ravleen, to your point, there's been a conversation of you can't be what you can't see for a number of years now, right? Like those words feel a little bit like buzzwords now. And I think we spoke previously to sometimes you have to do things that may initially feel unequal in order to drive the equity conversation. With that in mind, would you, Ravleen, like to start with what you feel, what measurable progress has been made in the last 6 to 12 months around DE&I within your own organisation?
Yeah, and I think measurement is probably the key thing I would pull out there. Measurement is a really important part of DE&I. It is only one part of it, but it is a really important one. And I think sometimes you can often hear people say, well, you can't measure all dimensions of diversity. And that's absolutely right. There are some dimensions that are easier to report on than others and that are legal to report on to others. But I don't think that means we shouldn't put focus behind measuring the things that we can measure. My perspective, diversity drives diversity. And so even if we can create diversity in some dimensions, it invites diversity in many other dimensions. And I've seen that happen. So bringing that back to Microsoft itself. So Microsoft's reported on pay equity specifically since 2016 in support of the company's commitment to pay employees equitably for substantially similar work. And it hasn't always been a pretty picture at Microsoft, even since the reporting begun. Are incredibly transparent on their annual diversity and inclusion report. And actually it's quite topical because our recent one just released from September last month. And so there's been a refreshed kind of rate of data that's been coming. And I guess what's different, I would say, in the last 6 to 12 months on that reporting, I'll talk a little bit about some of the results in a minute, is we are actually now reporting on dimensions and additional information that isn't required, because Microsoft wants to go above and beyond and be transparent about some of the things that we're driving that we think that we're not great at right now. But there's this brilliant quote around, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And so that, for me, is why measurement is so important. If you look at our latest report, it shows some headlines around, and so there's employees with racial and ethnic minority communities now make up 53% of Microsoft's core US workforce. We can't measure that legally outside of the US, so that's why that metric is US only. For the first time, women now make up more than 30% of Microsoft's core workforce worldwide. And since 2018, that representation has grown by a percentage point every single year. This year, actually, for the first time, we're also reporting on workforce of exits of employees, because there's no point bringing diverse employees in if we're losing them at the other end at the same rate. And again, we've seen a decrease in exits year on year from women and from our ethnic minority communities within the organization. The additional dimensions that we've been looking at this year, we're looking at how many of our employees self-identified as having served in the armed forces or have veteran status. And we're also looking at those that self-identify as having a disability, which at the moment stands at just under 8% worldwide. So I think for me, this is a really big thing for us. It's demanding to see the data, because it's all very well talking about the things that you're doing, but if you don't see that actually making a difference, then it's not always easy to believe that things are being done at all levels and that they are having the impact we want them to have.
That's really interesting. And I think what you've said around highlighting what's not great and actually working to address that, I suppose, in order to drive that change, like genuine change, I think we have to address the things that we're not good at. And Rachel, I'd love to understand, given your role at Criteo, I'd love to understand if you agree or what your thoughts are on that and how you see Criteo driving change as a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ravleen, I support everything you've said there. I think the work that Microsoft is doing is truly a role model in this area. Having been in HR for over 20 years, diversity, equity, inclusion has always been part of my priorities, but I've been specializing it in the past several years and joined Criteo in March last year. I think what we've seen is, particularly over the last 2 to 3 years, an amplification of this subject. And it's not just been something that, as Ravleen said, is numbers driven, because the challenge you have is there's a lot of legalities around what you can and can't report. So like Microsoft, we report on our global women. We're very lucky, we have 42%. We break that down into management, director, C-suite level. We're very lucky, we have a role model CEO who is a woman. And again, we measure ethnicity in the US. Outside of that, what we've done at Criteo is, and again, it's one of those subjects where you can have a global strategy, but there's not a global approach, because this lands differently depending on where you sit in the world and what each culture is astute to. So you have to take each region, each country on a slightly different journey and help them get on that journey. And so where we've really started to drive a focus and measurement is around inclusion, is around the culture that employees come into. How do they feel welcomed into the organization? Do they feel heard? Do they feel they can be safe to be themselves? Can they challenge and push back without retribution? And so we started measuring that. And that's something that we've seen land really well, because every person in every team all over the world can feel that feeling. And again, there's some power in that, because they can then also take personal action or team-based actions to look at, how do I help my colleagues feel more included? How do I help my colleagues feel more heard? And particularly in this hybrid working environment where we're all on Zooms and your different time zones, and the square that you're in could be a very different square that somebody else is sitting in, depending on their home working situation. So how do we create more accessible opportunities to ensure that we're providing that equity in the workplace or in the hybrid workplace? So that's been a hugely powerful movement, and I've seen a real buy-in to DEI in bringing it down to that sort of culture level. Again, we announced pay parity, so that is a big piece. Again, it stands, and it's not just about gender, it's pay parity across the organisation. We made a very clear statement in Q1 last year that we would sustain pay parity, that we made efforts to get there, and we continually measure that through our promotion cycles, through our merit cycles, to the point where Megan, our CEO, saw I think it was a 0.0 something difference, and she told the executive team to fix it. So we get down to that level, and I think that's important from a trust perspective for employees. But we know the industry still has a lot to do. And the biggest challenges that we're continuing to hear from our employees is that as you look up through the organisation, we still need to do more around leadership, and we're measuring that. We're measuring talent development, promotions. We're really working through mentoring programs, and that, again, looking at the effectiveness of those programs will help us look at the success of how do we ensure that the talent we attract, the culture we embrace, actually brings to life our DEI agenda.
So just to that, thank you, Rachel. I think one of the questions I'd like to open up to all of you is, do you think that any organisation or the organisations you work for have become more open? Rachel, you're saying you're trying to foster a feeling of openness and without judgment, etc. Do you think that has changed? Do you think colleagues are discussing their salaries, etc.? So I'd like to open that out to everyone.
I'm happy to go first but again, yes, I think employees are expecting that openness, that authenticity. They're almost demanding it because they know that the world has changed, that this has been flipped on its head, where it used to be, if I look back through my years in HR, it was seen as a corporate agenda. Now you've got employee resource groups, you've got allyship, you've got people who are speaking up at all levels of the organisation, demanding a different experience, a more equitable experience. And the organisations that aren't listening to them are going to lose out.
Yeah, Maya, I would say just quickly to that as well, I'm definitely seeing more managers actually being cognizant of this and bringing it up themselves and saying, hey, I've got 2 people in my team and I noticed that for some reason there's a gap in their salary or their compensation and they're not doing anything different and it doesn't look right to me. And I hear that much, much more than I used to. So I feel like as well as employees feeling empowered to say something, I've also seen people having that conversation with more openness with their managers, whereas I think in the past they may have been afraid to bring it up. But I've also seen managers being more proactive and going, I can see something here, doesn't feel right to me. Can we look at this, please? And can we do something about it? And I have seen things change.
So to that point, do you think, where does that responsibility sit? Because actually businesses are to some extent being held to account, but Rachel, Ravleen, to both of your points, you're saying managers are raising it on behalf of their teams. So the question here then is who do we hold to account? Where does that responsibility lie? Is that with everyone? And secondly, if that's for everyone, if we're going down that route, how do we collectively empower one another and the employees of a business at all levels to drive that actionable change? And again, I think I'd like to point to the piece around actionable change, right? Because some of it is measurable, some of it is not, and some of it is kind of, we all put our hands to say we will do something and then the outcome is left to the side a little bit. So Nikki, I'd love to get your thoughts on how you feel that's changed.
Yeah, definitely. I think the conversation is certainly more prevalent in businesses now than it ever has been, which is wonderful to see. But I think we can all be part of fostering environments that are open to education and change in these areas. It has to be a mixture of collaboration, education, accountability, as you said there, Maya, grassroots level upwards. We've got to constantly evolve our thinking on the subject. We've got to be open to listening, really, and ensuring that we are holding ourselves accountable as well as the businesses that we work within. And to give you an example of some of the work that has been happening here at PubMatic, we're very fortunate to have quite an active employee culture. And that's allowed us to create a number of DEI-led employee resource groups. A recent example of one that's done some fabulous work, actually, that's had real impact on the business is our neurodiversity ERG. So PubMatic funded a session with an external company who are experts in this area called Adjust. They came in and ran a session that was open to all of our teams, and it was to educate on neurodiversity. So what is it? What are the facets within that? What's the terminology that you would use for the facets within neurodiversity? And then they led a really open conversation around how we can adapt some of our working practices to make sure that anyone who's within our business, or to the earlier point, during taking a role at PubMatic, can feel supported in their day-to-day work. And the initiative that was taken with this resource group has had an immediate impact on the way that we're working, and it's been really positively received. And this is just one example of many kind of projects that are happening around the business, but it all starts with somebody who has an idea and really pushes that forward, and for the people around them within that business to support them in the ask. So it's very much on ourselves as much as it is the businesses that we work within to push the agenda, I would say.
So I think I agree with that. And I think, Sabah, you said earlier on that there is a responsibility, or that there should be a desire for each of us to educate ourselves. And I think, Nikki, you've highlighted that, is that there needs to be a willingness to learn. Is there anything, Sabah, you would add to that in terms of how else you see that fitting in terms of empowering ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing I'd say is that you don't need to be in leadership at an organisation to be able to facilitate change in that organisation. And I think a lot of what we've talked about today is around what we can do at an ERG level and empowering employees to feel comfortable, to be open, to be them true selves at work. And at IAS, we do a lot around that. But something that we also do that hasn't been mentioned today, we have mentorship programs internally to help with young talent, ensuring that their voices are heard and to develop them. And something else is giving time to our employees to volunteer. And this isn't necessarily directly impacting our organisation, but there are plenty of networks, certainly in the UK, that facilitate that change towards equity in the industry. So groups like Bloom and MEFA in the UK, by enabling your employees to volunteer and to be part of groups at the wider industry level where they can action change, is also really important. It's about education internally and externally as well as to what's available in the marketplace to help facilitate change in our industry as a whole.
And do you think there are any initiatives that you've seen, because there obviously are a lot of industry challenges in various forms. Are there any initiatives that you've seen either across IAS, I think you've touched on a couple of them, but across the wider industry that you think have worked well or are working well?
Yeah, I volunteer for Bloom myself, and this year I'm working on the exchange team, and I have to say that's a really great industry initiative. It's co-mentoring senior men and women in the industry, and the view is that they take the learnings and they drive towards equity within their organisation. So an example is we've had people in past years who've implemented equal parental policies in their organisations. And this is where I think Ravleen was talking to it during the first question, that it's about equity, right? And the WFA pointed out in a recent DEI report that there's been a lot done in our industry around the representation of women in our industry. But it's about looking at broader inclusion. So if you look at that example with Bloom, Bloom is a network that looks at equity for women because women are on the back foot in our industry. But really it's about equity, right? So we're not looking at maternity policies. In some cases we are, but really it should be about equal parental policies in industry and making sure it's equity in the true sense of the word. And then from a internal perspective at IS, the things that I mentioned, the mentoring, the ERG, similar to what Nikki was talking about, really making sure that people have a safe space to voice their true selves at work.
And just opening that out a bit more, Nikki, I think you spoke to the initiative at PubMatic. Is there anything else you've seen beyond that, or if anyone else wants to contribute?
Yeah, I think echoing what Sabah said there, as an organisation, we're very active members with Bloom, also with MEFA, and then thinking outside of the UK, we work with industry bodies such as Women in Data Science for India. She runs it in the US, and the purpose of that is for us as an organisation to share what's really working well for us, but also to listen to examples from other businesses that have been successful in this area, because we're really adamant that in working together, we're all going to get where we need to get to a lot quicker. So sharing experiences is absolutely paramount. I think outside of PubMatic, some really great initiatives that I've seen have come from some of the agency groups like Group M. So they do an awful lot of great projects around attracting diverse talent to their organisation, and one that I've particularly been interested in was the Visible Start programme that they've been delivering, which is about attracting older talent into the industry actually, rather than just focusing on kind of graduate level intakes. And I think that's a really interesting space that's been underutilised in the past. Also, there's a business that's called Circle, and they run professional coaching qualification programs, but what's unique about them is that they do outreach to find future corporate talent from underrepresented backgrounds. So young people that might be considering a career in media, for example, but other big corporate environments, they pair those young people with someone that's already working within a big organisation who is in a leadership position. And together you work through the programme and achieve a professional qualification. I think it's really valuable because having coaching skills as a leader is essential in building some of the culture within organisations that builds inclusion, some of the things that we've talked about before. But for that young person as well, they get a glimpse into what corporate life could look like for them, and they're able to access a network immediately to maybe find opportunities and give them their first step on the professional ladder. So I think they're really great initiatives, but there are so many. I'm sure other people on the panel have other examples too.
Yeah, I think to that point, having that introduction, it's to Ravleen's point, is you can't be what you can't see. So if you're coming into an industry, whether you're junior and you're young and you're just coming in, or whether you're a little bit older and you've been in other industries, I think it's very important to be able to see someone that looks like you. And it's great that there are other initiatives that are in place. I do think that we've covered quite a wide span of questions without drilling down into the detail. But as a recap, given the challenges and given the progress that we've made, I'd love to understand from each of you where you think we could be doing more and what initiatives could be in place, or how we can prioritise DE&I to make sure the conversation doesn't fall by the wayside.
Look, I'll go first. I think for me, and panels like this are great because it needs to be a united effort. It needs to come through the entire ecosystem. It's not just about attracting talent. It's not about purely around just the talent cycle. It's about who you deal with. Are you dealing with organizations that have the same values, that encompass the same mindset? Are we thinking outside our own organization to impact change across the industry? Again, I'll reference, we're in a very heavily tech sectored industry, which, you know, when you look at the figures, 26% of women graduates in tech, there are 26% women graduates in tech, but then there's a fallout rate for actual roles in tech. And on average, most countries have around 20% women in tech. So from graduation to being in a role, there's a fallout itself. So there's more the industry can do to A, entice women into tech careers and to keep them there. And that's just one example. And then we think about disability, because there's a huge piece around how welcome is your organization to disability. And that's not just physical, but that's hidden, mental. And again, what are the accommodations an organization is doing, not only through hiring, but through the whole employment life cycle, career development, and where it can be seen as a barrier because I have a disability, that role may not be attainable. How do we help those roles become attainable? And again, I could keep going on, but I think there is just a lot we can do to broaden our efforts across the industry rather than just being insular and looking inward at our organizations.
I can go next. Really, it's something that needs to be measured on an ongoing basis internally. We talked about measurement, and the way you prioritize internally is through surveying your employees and seeing what is working and what's not working and going from there. There's also a big opportunity in our industry to partner with programs and organizations that will help fill tech positions from underrepresented groups. And obviously, we're all here from a media perspective. And in our industry, we think of diversity as a challenge internally from an HR perspective, representation when it comes to events like this, or in content itself. But advertisers, media, planning and buying choices have a direct impact on mainstream portrayal of diversity and inclusion. So that's really important that media plans reflect today's society from a diversity perspective. And yes, from an ad tech perspective, that we have the tools for our partners to allow them to reflect their DE&I values as well.
Great.
I couldn't agree more with what you've just said, actually, Sabah. There's a lot in there. And I think the whole area around the responsible supply chain in media, we haven't really touched on that, but that is a whole new area, and about how advertising can help fund the voices from underrepresented groups. There's a big piece there. But again, echoing back to measurement and being accountable as a business, like some of the others that I mentioned before, every August we publish our DE&I credentials in a report that anyone can go online and access, so that we're able to measure how well we're doing against our goals and set goals for the following year. And I think businesses being able to take that area seriously and make those public pledges is a fantastic way of ensuring that we're moving that agenda forward and keeping it front and centre where it should be, at the top of everyone's consciousness.
And Ravleen, just to finish with you.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I think number one is the priority needs to be understanding that businesses that don't do this stand to lose a lot. If you look at all the reports, what they'll tell you is now more than ever, in the face of change and uncertainty, future employees as well as your consumers are looking for brands who are authentic and act with purpose. And purpose and mission is intrinsically linked to D&I. It creates trust and it will bring your customers to you. And people, all the reports, there's so many out there that will tell you, including we released this Marketing with Purpose playbook, which has tons of stats in it around the percentage of people who stopped buying from brands because they did not see that they were operating with purpose. They could not see what they were doing to make and drive societal change. So that should be a top priority for anyone right now, given the time that we are working through. And then just the final thing, back to what everyone said, is around measurement. The other thing I think that has been game changing for us at Microsoft is that our performance bonuses, our D&I priority counts towards our bonus. So for every employee at every level, whether you are a manager, a leader, or an individual contributor, if at the end of the year you cannot show that you have helped the company to make progress or personally made progress on your D&I journey, you can pick what you want that thing to be. That is not dictated to anybody, but you need to show progress to get to 100% of achieving your goals for your role. You cannot do it if you cannot show that. And over a number of years, that has completely changed the face of how D&I is actually prioritized within our organization.
Great, thank you so much. I think that's a really powerful way to finish, and actually ties very closely back to what we started with, which is driving actionable change. And it's fantastic to hear there are so many initiatives in our industry, and that there are people that are here driving that change and continuing to make a difference. I think we've covered everything from what businesses are doing at different levels, how we can all make a difference ourselves. But Ravleen, thank you for finishing in that way, and for everyone else for your opinions. I think that was a great way to finish the panel.